बिहारी गोपीजन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन यमुना तीरवनचारी यमुना तीरवनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare His divine grace of her Charanaravinda Bhakti Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Shri Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Mai ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. The speaker should not be saying this, but somebody should oversee the children's affairs to see that there is no noise of children here. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Karamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Can we have some of you moving up front here? You can keep this at the back. There's some vacant space here, so there are devotees standing at the back. Everyone please move up so that the devotees coming at the end can have a place to sit.
Going out, right? Finish it.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So our topic is glorious departures. We've been speaking about the importance of learning how to die, because that is ultimately the goal of life. It is a test of our life. Our consciousness at death is what determines our next destination. If we think about Krishna at death, then we go to Krishna's abode. If we do not think of Krishna at death, we come back into this material world for yet another life. And this will continue till such time as we learn to think of Krishna with devotion at the time of death. And in order to think of Krishna at death, we have to think of Krishna when we are living, when we are alive. It is a lifetime of preparation, a lifetime of practice of Krishna consciousness to be able to think of Krishna with devotion at death. We discussed this idea on the first day. On the second day, we discussed the pastime of the passing away of Parikshit Maharaj. Then the next lecture was about the glories of the passing away of Srila Haridas Thakur. And there are many such great examples. I'd like to speak today about the passing away of a great Vaishnavacharya, Srila Ramanujacharya. And if time permits, we'll talk briefly about the passing away of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and close the series with a brief discussion of Srila Prabhupada's passing away from this world. It all depends how it goes. We will see. As far as Ramanujacharya is concerned, he is of course one of the greatest spiritual giants that history has produced in the last millennium or so. He belonged to the Sri Sampradaya, the Sampradaya of Lakshmi Devi. Srila Ramanujacharya was a very, very empowered Acharya, a great preacher, extremely learned, greatly devoted, and he revitalized the whole of Krishna consciousness. He revitalized Krishna consciousness in the whole of South India, and the effects of that are found to the present day even. To talk about Ramanuja's passing away, we need to briefly speak about the passing away of one of his favorite disciples and devotees, Quresh. I did make a brief mention of this in one of the earlier lectures, but let me talk about it a little more now as a prelude to the passing away of Srila Ramanujacharya. Quresh himself was a very exalted devotee of Krishna. He was actually older in age than Ramanujacharya was. His life was also another exemplary life of devotion. Each of these great devotees are exemplary for us, and their lives are worthy of our studying them very deeply. Now, Quresh was always very shy to ask anything from the Supreme Lord. Whenever he went in front of the deity of Lord Ranganath in Sri Rangam, the Lord would often ask him, "Tell me, Quresh, what do you want?" The devotees there were of such caliber that they would actually speak to the Lord. Well, speaking to the Lord is not a problem, but to have the Lord speak back to you, that's the issue. Anyone can come and speak to the Lord. But to have the Lord reply, and sometimes to initiate a conversation, that was special. So when Quresh would come, he would never ask for anything. And many times the Lord would have to actually tell him, so look, your son is about to get married, aren't you going to ask me anything? He said, no, my Lord, you're going to handle it, so it's okay. He would never ask. The Lord would have to remind him to ask, and still he wouldn't ask, but the Lord would do whatever was needed. One time, however, Quresh came in front of Ranganath, and Ranganath asked him, Quresh, by the way, Lord Ranganath is a form of Lord Vishnu, who is an expansion of Krishna, so not different from Krishna. He is a Vishnu form, very large deity, who is in a reclining posture, very unusual. Generally, the deities of the Lord are standing, but here is a deity who's huge, massive. You need 3 or 4 doors actually to have darshan properly. And he's reclining with his palm on the side of his head like that. So Quresh came in front of Lord Ranganath, and the Lord said, Quresh, it seems that you're thinking about something. So what are you thinking about? What do you want from me? Tell me. Ranganath was always eager that Quresh should ask something and give him an opportunity to fulfill his desires. But Quresh never had any desires. So this time Quresh said, yes, I have a desire. So the Lord was happy, asked me, come on, tell me something now. And in contrast, Krishna in so many temples must be getting tired, right? Nowadays everybody comes and asks, Krishna, please give me this, give me that, give me this. We come with a shopping list of so many things to demand. But finally that Quresh had something to ask, the Lord was eager to hear. He said, tell me Quresh, what do you want? He said, now I want to go back to Vaikuntha. Will you give me entrance into your abode? And Lord Ranganath was taken aback. He said, of course. You're welcome anytime. What to speak of you? Anyone who has any connection with you is also assured of coming into my abode. So Quresh was very satisfied to hear that. And of course there were others who heard this. So the news spread like wildfire. Everybody was on WhatsApp and Facebook. This is what the Lord has said to Quresh. Everyone is going. Anyone, yes, Quresh is going to leave. The Lord has said that he will come back to Vaikuntha. And anyone connected to him will also go back to Vaikuntha. Then the word spread and it reached the ears of Ramanujacharya, who was his guru. So Ramanujacharya hurried to where Quresh was. He said, Quresh, what am I hearing? What have you done? Meanwhile, Quresh had been feeling, he had second thoughts. He said, oh, I made a mistake. I should have consulted my guru before going to the Lord and asking him for something like this. And sure enough, Ramanuja came and said, Quresh, what have you done? How can you go to Vaikuntha before me? That's not right. And then how will I be able to stay here without you? So, no, that can't be done. I'm going to Lord Ranganath and tell him to reverse the decision. So then Ramanujacharya turned and started walking hastily towards the temple. But he stopped in his tracks after a few steps. And he thought, actually, who am I to interfere in the Lord's decisions? If the Lord wants to take Quresh back, then who am I to interfere? Then he halted and said, all right, Quresh, if that's your desire, so be it. But you are going to Vaikuntha before me, do you think it's right? Then Quresh said, I know that according to the etiquette of this world, it's the elders who are to be served by the youngsters. Those who are senior should be served by those who are junior. But in the spiritual world in Vaikuntha, I've had the realizations recently that it's the opposite. There it's the seniors who serve the juniors. You see, the spiritual world is the material world is the opposite of the spiritual world. So there, when any devotee attains perfection in devotion in the material world and gets transferred to the spiritual world, then those who have gone there before him or those who had already been there always, they are waiting in a reception party to welcome this devotee. And they serve him in many different ways. So they are actually there like in a reception party to welcome and serve the newly arrived pure devotee. So therefore, I also want to be there before you arrive, so I can be there in the welcoming party when you arrive in Vaikuntha. That's my service to you. I don't want you to come there just without anybody from here knowing you. Such was the discussions that went on among the devotees there, and that was their dealings with the deities. So the devotees of the Sri Sampradayas, Ramanujastan, Yamunacharya, the Alvars, very, very special, rich devotion. And so intimate was the connection with the deity, because they didn't see the deity as a statue. They actually had a very personal relationship with the deity, and they were seeing the spiritual form of the deity. They just didn't see stone. In the case of one devotee, I don't remember who it is now, when the time came for him to go to Vaikuntha, he said, "My dear Lord, if you look anything different from what you look now in the temple here, I don't want to go back to Vaikuntha." Many times we devotees ask, what does Krishna look like in Goloka or in Vaikuntha? Does he look exactly like this? So this devotee was saying, if you don't look like this, I don't want to go there. So in any case, so Ramanuja then said, all right, Quresh, if that's what you wish, that's your wish. Then Quresh went to his son, Parashar Bhatta, who was very young, but he had been selected by Ramanujacharya to be his successor, the successor Acharya. And he said, Parashar, the Lord has sanctioned my departure, and I'll be going to Vaikuntha very shortly. See, they were talking as if they're going to Melbourne or something. Going to Brisbane, I'm taking the next flight. My flight is 2 days from now or something. So I'm going to Vaikuntha. So Parashar, remember, never feel proud of yourself. Because Parashar was an extraordinarily gifted young man. Very scholarly, very devoted. He said, never get proud, and always be the servant of Ramanujacharya. Never leave his lotus feet. Then Quresh went to his wife, who was also very elderly at that time, and said, I also didn't ask you before I asked the Lord to leave. So do you mind if I go to Vaikuntha? So she said, well, my life is only in your pleasure. If you wish and you're going to Vaikuntha, that's all right. If that's what you want, the Lord wants. And then Quresh departed from this world, remembering Krishna, absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Lord, and his soul left and entered into Vaikuntha. Meanwhile, Ramanuja was thinking, without Quresh, life doesn't look so good here. Of course, the Lord is there, Ranganath is here, but I want Quresh, and in any case, I've become an old man. Ramanuja was over 100 years old at this time. So now Ramanuja went to the deity, Ranganath, and said, my dear Lord, I have something to ask you. He said, yes. What do you want? He said, I want to go to Vaikuntha too. He said, but no, Ramanuja, I want you to stay here more and preach. Because there's so much more preaching to be done, there's many more devotees to be made. You've done a great job so far, but it still has to go on. Then Ramanuja replied, he said, well, I'm over 100 years old now. And according to your laws, your scriptures say that generally in Kali Yuga people don't live more than 100 years. So the time has come now for me to go. So if you wish, please now, let me terminate my activities here in this world, on this earth, and let me enter your abode. So then the Lord replied to him and said, okay, Ramanuja, then 4 days from now, you will leave this world and you will come to my abode, Vaikuntha. In the meanwhile, I forgot to mention one thing. When Ramanuja heard of the benediction that the Lord had given to Quraysh, he had mixed feelings. On one hand, he was feeling that Quraysh would leave, they would be bereft of the association of Quraysh. But he also started jumping and dancing. And he had his upper cloth, the uttariya, and then he started waving that, and all the devotees were wondering. They were asking him, what has happened? Why are you so ecstatic? He said, I will be able to go back. Now I'm qualified to go back to Godhead. I'm qualified to go back to Vaikuntha. So what do you mean? He said, look, the Lord blessed Quraysh and said, anyone who's connected to you will go back to Godhead. And I'm his guru. So I can also go back to Godhead. So they were all struck with wonder to hear of Ramanuja's mood. Anyway, so now that Ramanuja himself was about to depart, he didn't tell anyone. This was private between him and the Lord. There was no one to overhear that conversation. So then he called all his disciples and he said, I want to speak something important to all of you. So he started giving them instructions, many important and intimate instructions. Someone told me that the number of instructions he gave his devotees was about 74. Many useful things, some small points and some very major points. He started giving them instructions one after the other, and they didn't know that Ramanuja would be leaving in 4 days. Finally, somebody suspected something. They said, Guru Maharaj, why are you telling us all these instructions? Generally, when someone calls you and says it's like giving you parting instructions. So they got suspicious. They said, why are you telling us all these things? Then he revealed the fact. He said, I'll be leaving in a couple of days from now. And when the disciples heard that, their hearts were shattered. And they all fell to the ground and they were wailing and sobbing. They said, no, we can't. How can that be? How can that be? Please stay on. But he said, now the time has come and all of you have to carry on this movement. Some of them said, then we'll give up our life if you go. Then Ramanuja became stern. He said, mind you, anyone who gives up his life after I leave will lose his connection with me and with the entire parampara before me, and therefore with Krishna. So I want you to all promise that you will not do anything like this after I depart from this world. So then individually everybody promised and said, yes, we will not do anything like that. So then Ramanuja said, all right. So then he continued with his instructions. In the meanwhile, to assuage the feelings of separation that his disciples and the devotees in general would feel from him, he instructed that a deity be made of him. So a metal deity was made in a mold very quickly, and it was an exact replica of his. Very quickly it was made, and then Ramanuja embraced his own deity and imparted his life force into that deity. And then he said, this deity can be installed in my birthplace, which is a place called Sri Perumbudur in the southern state of Tamil Nadu. So then the deity was taken there and installed, and the worship of the deity was begun even in Ramanuja's manifest pastimes, even as he was living, but in his very last few days, last 2 days or so. And then Ramanuja began to feel very weak, in the sense that symptoms were manifesting in his body that were not seen earlier. And all the devotees were getting increasingly worried. They were waiting for the final passing away pastime of Ramanujacharya. And then he organized a very big feast. And he told that he had all the devotees invited there. And in the feast, after that was over, then he went into the temple. It was the custom that whenever the Charanamrita of the Lord was being distributed for the first time, it was Ramanujacharya who would be the first person to receive the Charanamrita. He would take it, and then the others would also take. This time, however, he called his appointed successor, Parashar Bhatta. And he said, Parashar, now you go ahead of me and you will be the first one to receive it. Because Ramanujacharya wanted to ensure that after his departure, there would be no issues with succession. He had already announced it, so all the devotees knew that Parashar Bhatta would be the successor Acharya to Ramanujacharya. Nevertheless, he also wanted to ensure that Parashar Bhatta would be given the same respect that he had been accorded as the Acharya, so that there would be no problems later. So instead of him taking the Charanamrit first, he put Parashar Bhatta in front of him, so that everyone could see that he had now instituted this practice himself of Parashar Bhatta taking the Charanamrit first. So then after Parashar Bhatta had taken it, then Ramanuja went and then he took the Charanamrit. So he set the practice, the standard for many, many years to come. And then he informed his brother Govinda. He said, please teach him well. He is very young, but he will be the great Acharya to follow. So because Parashar was young, Ramanuja was old, his disciples, most of them were very, very old. So he wanted somebody young who would continue the lineage, spiritual lineage of the Sri Sampradaya. Therefore he had chosen Parashar Bhatta. And then he called them together again to give them instructions, all the disciples. And he said, none of you should be worried overly about your maintenance in this world. As far as your Deha Yatra is concerned, Deha means the body, Yatra means the journey. Your condition of body in this world, your monetary situation, your body and so on, your family situation, don't be overly anxious about it. Because if you are, it indicates that you don't have faith in the scripture. Because the scripture explains the law of karma, which says that according to destiny, you will receive whatever happiness and distress is due to you. So accept that and don't worry overly about it. Because your Deha Yatra, or the destination of your body, is karma adhina. Karma adhina. Adhina means it is subservient to or under the control of your karma. So according to the karma you have performed in the past, you will get wealth or you will not get wealth. You will have good health or bad health. So don't overly worry about these things. And you should not even overly worry about attaining spiritual perfection. Then they were puzzled. I said, how is that? We can understand when you say that we shouldn't worry overly about one's material situation, but you are saying we shouldn't even worry overly about our spiritual perfection, going back to Godhead? He said, yes. He says, as far as the Atma Yatra is concerned, the destination or the journey of the soul is concerned, that is Ishwaradhin. It is under the control of the Supreme Lord. So why should you worry about it? If you overly start worrying that, will I reach the Vaikuntha climax or not? Will I reach Goloka or not? Then you compromise a couple of things. First and foremost, you compromise the spirit of total surrender. Ananya Sharanapvam. Sharana means surrender. Ananya means one-pointed. So when you surrender to Krishna, you want to do whatever he says. It's not that you can demand, I want to do this, I want to do that. Whatever the Lord wants, you do. The second thing is Ananya Bhogyatvam. That spirit that I am only meant for Krishna's pleasure. I only want to serve Krishna for his pleasure, not for my pleasure. That point will also be compromised. And the third point is Ananya Gatitvam. That Krishna's lotus feet are your only destination. You're not independent in any way. And whatever Krishna wishes will happen. So these three things will be compromised if you overly desire that you want to go to Vaikuntha. Then Guru Maharaj, what should we be concerned with? What should we be worried about? Just worry about whether you are able to serve Krishna nicely. Worry about how well you are able to please the Supreme Lord. And that's really the Krishna conscious philosophy. We're not concerned about this destination or that destination, although the pure devotees of the Lord will automatically go to Vaikuntha, to the spiritual world. They will be taken by the Lord, even if they don't ask for it. But nevertheless, the devotees only want unconditional service to the Lord. They don't demand anything in return, even entrance into Vaikuntha. Sometimes because of the intimate dealings, the devotees may speak to the Lord and ask for things just as Quresh and Ramanuja asked for the Lord. But that level of devotion was extraordinary. So then he said, just be concerned that you can please the Lord by your service. So be worried whether you are pleasing the Lord through your service or not. That should be your worry. And then he spoke many things actually. We don't have time today to speak about those instructions. But he also instructed them to not commit any Vaishnava aparad. Always serve the devotees. Never offend them. And then he made a surprising statement. He said, even if it is the goddess of fortune, Sita, if Sita Devi also offends a devotee, then she also is in trouble. Just see what happened when Sita offended Lakshman. When she sent Lord Ram to find the golden deer, the Asura Maricha, at behest of Ravana, had taken the form of a golden deer to entice Sita. And that was Ravana's devious plan. So when Ram went out in search of this golden deer, who was Maricha in disguise, Maricha very cunningly cried out, Lakshman, Lakshman, save me. He cried out in Ram's voice, although it wasn't Ram calling at all. So when he called out like that, Sita was alarmed. Lakshman was confident. Lakshman understood that Ram was perfectly capable of defending himself. But Sita became very worried. She said, Lakshman, that's Ram's voice. So go immediately and help him. He's in need now. Lakshman said, no, there's no need. Ram is perfectly capable of defending himself. There's nothing to worry at all. And in any case, my elder brother gave me strict instructions to not leave you and go away. And then Sita, in her anxiety, she lost control of herself and she said, I know why you want to be here. Because you have bad intentions. So you don't want to go and save your brother. Lakshman couldn't bear that. He couldn't tolerate that. So he said, all right, I'll go. So he left. Of course, there is this pastime about him drawing a line, which later became known as the famous Lakshman Rekha. Don't cross this line and go. That isn't there in the Valmiki Ramayana, but is there in the other, I suppose, in the other itihasas somewhere. So because she offended Lakshman like that, Ramanujacharya said, see what happened to her afterwards. She was kidnapped by Ravana. And then see the destination, how much she had to suffer in Lanka and even thereafter. Of course, Sita, Lakshman, Ram, these are not ordinary jivas. And certainly, these are all pastimes that take place to instruct us in the material world. Martyavatarastva martya shikshanam raksho vadhaiva na kevalam vibho. The Srimad Bhagavatam says that the purpose of the advent of Lord Ram in this world, Martya Avatara, Martya Loka, in this planet where everybody dies, The Supreme Lord appeared in this world as Ram, not simply to kill the demon Ravana, but to give instructions to the people of this world through his actions. So through his life story, we learn many lessons. So here is an important lesson, and Ramanuja was alluding to that when he said that even Sita Devi is not spared the consequences of it. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you know, he also mentioned, because Sachi Mata, his mother, once offended Advaita Acharya by holding him responsible for his older brother taking sannyas. She is responsible, he is responsible for taking my son away from me. And Advaita Acharya was just preaching Krishna consciousness. So eventually Mahaprabhu arranged for Sachi Mata to take the dust from the lotus feet of Advaita Acharya. When Advaita Acharya was not in a position to know, he was in an ecstatic trance at that time. So in any case, Ramanuja gave a lot of emphasis to the service of the Vaishnavas. In the Sri Sampradaya in particular, this is very strongly emphasized. The service to devotees, Vaishnava Seva. And then, as time passed, the time arrived, the appointed time came, and Ramanuja lay down with his brother Govinda, who was also a sannyasi, and his disciple, with his head on Ramanuja's thighs and his feet on another devotee, Andrapurna's thighs. And as he lay there with all the devotees surrounding him, he left this world and returned to Vaikuntha, the spiritual world. Different devotees, different disciples of his were chanting. Some were chanting the holy names, some were reciting the various scriptures. And they all had tears in their eyes, but they were consistently reciting and going on and on chanting. And in that situation, Ramanujacharya departed from this world and entered into the kingdom of the Supreme Lord, the Vaikuntha world. There are many parallels like this in the passing away of different acharyas. Madhvacharya also, and I'll be very brief here, when he passed away, he's a great acharya of the Madhva Sampradaya. In Udupi there is a famous Krishna temple where there is a deity of Balakrishna that was personally installed by Madhvacharya himself, and that was the deity that had been worshipped by Rukmini Devi herself in Dwarka. It was Krishna who had manifested himself as in the child form in order to fulfill the request of his principal queen, Rukmini Devi. And somehow, it's a long story, but somehow the deity came here, Madhvacharya installed the deity there. Next to the temple of Krishna is the ancient temple of Ananteshwar. It was there even before the deity of Krishna came to Udupi. So that was where Madhvacharya would often give lectures, and he would teach many things to his disciples. So when the time came for Madhvacharya to depart, he had already prepared his disciples and other devotees, and he sat there on the place where he usually sat, next to the main sanctum sanctorum, the altar in the temple. His seat was reserved. He sat there, and his authentic biography, Madhva Vijay, explains that the demigods started showering flowers because they knew that the time had come for Madhvacharya to depart from this world. So as he was sitting there speaking on his favorite scripture, the Aitareya Upanishad, he was reciting that, and the flowers were falling on him to such a degree that his body was entirely covered with flowers and his body couldn't be seen. Then some of his leading disciples rushed forward to push off the flowers so that his body could be seen again. And as they started pushing away the flowers, the body was nowhere to be seen. Madhvacharya had disappeared. He had gone to another realm of existence. He had gone to join his spiritual master Vyasadeva in Badrikashram. That is what the Madhvas believe. So he departed there, speaking on the scriptures. So the glory is passing away. To pass away when you're hearing the holy name, when you're hearing the devotees reciting the scriptures like the Bhagavatam, or when you're speaking the Bhagavatam or some other Vedic scripture like that. Even amongst the devotee community in ISKCON now, and the devotees always make sure that when there is a devotee who's about to leave, the other devotees gather together and they simply do kirtan there. There's no crying, no emotion, but everybody focuses all their mental energy on chanting the holy names to facilitate the departure of that soul further on to the spiritual world. They don't waste their time crying. They don't waste their time talking other things. They just chant. And then the devotees listening to the chanting, the devotees in a position to chant along with them. Physically they chant verbally, otherwise in the mind. Even if the devotee is not in a state of consciousness or an external consciousness, the devotees still chant till this particular devotee leaves. Many instances like this. In Vrindavan, in fact, there is a hospice that is especially meant for those who are about to leave. Because many devotees from the Krishna conscious movement are getting old. Or even if they're not that old, some of them have terminal illnesses where they're given only a short time to live. So those who have been given by their doctors only a limited time to live, only these devotees can actually be admitted to this hospice. And then they get not just the medical treatment, which is palliative care to reduce the pain and so on, but more importantly, they get spiritual care. They have devotees who come and read to them. They have devotees who will chant for them, especially as they approach their last few moments or their hours. I personally have done that on a few occasions, and especially when some of us sannyasis were leaving from this world. I remember there was one sannyasi who used to manage the BBT for many years, His Holiness Narmada Swami. So I used to be based in Vrindavan in those days, and then I was suddenly told, I used to visit him every now and then, because he had taken a vow that he wanted to leave in Vrindavan, and he didn't want to eat or drink. He was just focusing his energies on living in a proper frame of consciousness. So then I got a message that he's about to leave any moment. So then I rushed, I left all my other work and I rushed, and we all sat there. I was sitting right next to him, and we were chanting and we were all doing kirtan together. And as I was looking at his face right then and there, he departed from this world. And there were several devotees sitting around, and we were all chanting. You could see his last breath. And especially Vrindavan is the place where people would like to leave their bodies. But even if somebody doesn't leave their body in Vrindavan for practical reasons, they're not able to reach there or whatever, still there is no loss, because ultimately Vrindavan is where Krishna is, and if our thoughts are with Krishna, then we are in Vrindavan. That is our philosophy. Mora mana Vrindavan, Mahaprabhu has said. My mind is Vrindavan. So even though Vrindavan is also a physical destination, it's a place, but also it's a state of consciousness. So when we are always thinking of Krishna, then we are with Krishna, we are in Vrindavan. So as far as the devotee is concerned, even if he or she dies anywhere in Sydney or New York or China or anywhere, the devotee is assured of being taken back to Godhead. But nevertheless, for people who know that they have a certain amount of time left, they like to go to Vrindavan to leave. And Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhakti Swami Srila Prabhupada, did that. He was already 81 years old. He had begun this movement at the age of 69. When he incorporated ISKCON in New York, he was about 70 years old. He had only 12 years in which he established his worldwide movement with over 100 centers and temples, with thousands of disciples made, with books, many titles of books, including the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nectar of Devotion, many other books, published in many languages, in huge quantities, unprecedented. He achieved remarkable things in a very short span of time. And if one were to analyze it from a material point of view, one could say the most extraordinary rags to riches story you can ever find. Because when he went to America, he had only $7 in his pocket. And even in those days, $7 didn't get you very far for too long. And by the time he was ready to depart from this world, 12 years later, he was presiding over practically what could be called in material terms a spiritual empire. Thousands of devotees, hundreds of centers. Some of them were castles that were purchased. Some of them old churches that were purchased. Some of them grand new temples that were built like in Vrindavan, Hyderabad, Vrindavan, Mumbai also. And then it was now time for him to go. But even though he had control, so to speak, from an ordinary point of view of so much of opulence, but he was not at all attached to it. Because he understood this is only for Krishna's service. So he would simply ensure that everything, every penny that was received was used for Krishna's service. That no money was wasted. He was very particular. He was old school. So he would maintain his little notes about how much money he spent every day. And his old diaries from the time he was in Delhi distributing back to Godheads, he would mention the paisa spent for the rickshaw, how much he spent for this, how much he spent for buying the toothpaste, and how much he spent for this. He would make meticulous notes to see that everything was kept carefully and no unnecessary expense was incurred. So in any case, as time passed now, he came to Vrindavan. He was in frail health and devotees were really worried. And in 1976, he came for his last visit to the Bhaktivedanta Manor in London, just outside of London. And then he expressed his desire to go back to Vrindavan. Of course, every now and then when he got some strength back, he would want to go out again to preach. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta used to say, Pran ache jar, she hetu prachar. Whoever has life, he preaches Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada was like that. Whenever he got even an ounce of energy, he would want to go out and preach again to some part of the world. So anyway, this time he realized that he had little time left. He had only a few months left. So he went to India. And then he wanted to go to Vrindavan. He went to some other places first. Then eventually he reached Vrindavan. In Vrindavan he was extremely feeble. Practically there was no flesh on his body. He was all bones, skin and bone. And then he started preaching to his disciples. And he said, this is what this material body, this material world is. This material world means only skin and bones. And then he started mentioning how in the olden days, people could control their life heirs by keeping them within the bones. In Satya Yuga that used to happen. Like Hiranyakashipu, his body was practically eaten away when he was performing austerities, but he managed to hold the life air within the bones, in the bone marrow. Of course, in Kali Yuga that's not possible. Prana resides in anna or in food. So we can't maintain our life without food. But in Satya Yuga, people would maintain their life airs without food, even without air. What to speak of water? So then he was talking about these examples, and then one of the devotees said, "Well, Prabhupada, you're also doing that now." Because he was practically skin and bone, but still he was wanting to translate. His dictaphone was there. He was very clear-headed, in possession of his mental faculties. He was giving instructions to his disciples. And so his disciples said, "You're also like that, Srila Prabhupada." Many of the devotees were crying. They requested Prabhupada to please stay on, please don't leave. So Prabhupada said, "All right, few days. I'll extend it by a few days." So he extended it by a few days. But then he said, "It's not in my hands. It's in Krishna's hands." So at this time, Srila Prabhupada allowed himself to be served. All his disciples got an opportunity to serve him in such a way where he allowed them to do whatever they wanted to do with his body. And then the devotees were there. As word spread from all over the world, the devotees started gathering in Vrindavan, all in horrified anticipation of the eventual passing away of Srila Prabhupada. More and more of them started coming. His god brothers also came to visit him from Mathura and other mutts in Vrindavan. And then when they came, Srila Prabhupada looked at them and said, "Please forgive me for all my offenses. In the course of the preaching I have done many things." And they said, "No, no, no." They used to call him Swami Maharaj. His god brothers would address him as Swami Maharaj. Said, "No, no, Swami Maharaj, you have done extraordinary work. And now because of you, the holy name has spread all over the world. You have fulfilled Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's desire and order." So at this time the disciples were watching this exchange, and they were thinking of how Srila Prabhupada had actually manifested his humility. Even Ramanujacharya, when he was about to leave and he called his disciples, he said the same thing to his disciples. "Please forgive me for all the offenses that I may have committed against you." And the disciples were horrified to hear this. So there are many parallels between the passing away pastimes of all these great acharyas. And then Prabhupada started speaking later similarly to his disciples. "I may have offended many people. I've called people rascal," because Prabhupada used to sometimes call people rascal, because he said it's only to teach them, only to establish the truth that I spoke in a harsh way sometimes. In this way, the last few days were very, very sweet and very intimate. All the devotees were serving him in different ways. And finally, when the Kaviraj came, the Ayurvedic doctor, who understood that very little time was left now, he said, "So, Swami Maharaj, do you want anything more?" He said, "I'm fully satisfied. I don't want anything more now," indicating that he was ready to go from this world. I would recommend highly to all of you to read Srila Prabhupada's Leelamrita by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami Maharaj, which documents this passing away pastime in great detail. Over the weeks and months that preceded his passing away, and the events leading up to it, and the different conversations that took place between the devotees and Prabhupada, are all there. I am only narrating it in very brief right now. So then Srila Prabhupada was still giving instructions to his devotees, still telling them about this and that. He would still like to hear about the news of preaching going on everywhere. How many books are getting distributed here? What is the news from such and such temple? And when the time came, on 14 November 1977, it was 7:21 in the evening when Srila Prabhupada in his quarters in the Krishna Balaram Mandir departed from this world. And every year, on his disappearance day, Tithi, according to the Vedic calendar, devotees gather from different parts of the world to remember Srila Prabhupada. And in the very same room and on the very same bed that he departed from, there is an arati that takes place exactly at that time, 7:21 in the evening. And there's very little space there, so people gather all outside the rooms, everywhere. There's a hush everywhere as the arati goes on, and some light chanting goes on there, soft chanting, in remembrance of that time. And then Srila Prabhupada, the great general who came here to fight Maya, then he departed, went back to Krishna's abode. Even his own spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, had a similar passing away with a similar mood. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was in Jagannath Puri, and then he moved to Calcutta, and he had mutts there. He preferred to leave his body in Mayapur, in Calcutta. He was in Puri, he could have left his body there. He could have gone to Mayapur and left his body there. But he preferred to be in Calcutta. Why was that? Because he said, I am a soldier fighting on behalf of Krishna. Spiritual soldier, not with guns and bombs, but with a holy name and with a weapon of transcendental knowledge. We are here to fight Maya. And the main battlefields for us are these big cities like Calcutta. Of course, now he would have said, like Sydney, like New York, like Bombay, Tokyo, and so on. So therefore, I want to die in the battlefield. So he preferred to go back to Kolkata, Calcutta. And then in a few days prior to that, he would, even when he was in Puri, he would constantly recite 2 poems or 2 songs composed by Rupa and Raghunath Goswamis. Pratyasham me kur govardhan, Pratyasham me kurtvam govardhan purnam. O Govardhan, please fulfill my every desire. He had only transcendental desires, of course. And the other one was Nija Nikata Nivasam Dehi Govardhanatvam. O Govardhan, please eternally grant me residence near you. So these are 2 famous songs of the Acharyas. So he would sing them regularly and recite these words when he was in Puri in the few days leading up to his eventual passing away in Calcutta. And then when he arrived in Calcutta, then he called his disciples and gave them instructions. Just see the same pattern. Just like Ramanuja called his disciples, Srila Prabhupada too, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur also. And he gave them many instructions. And he too started begging forgiveness from his disciples. Please pardon me for all the offenses I have committed. I may have spoken roughly to many people, but it was only for the service of Sri Krishna. All of you never leave the service of Krishna. Always aspire to be only a speck of dust at the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Goswami. Don't aspire for anything more. Do not be involved in the pleasures of this world. Focus only on our eternal service to Sri Rupa Manjari, who has come as Rupa Goswami in this world. There will be many difficulties that come in the way as we continue the work of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But never give up, never be disheartened. In this way, he started giving many instructions to his disciples. He also asked one of his disciples to sing the song Sri Rupa Manjari Pada, which is a very famous song. And maybe the thought just strikes me, should we sing that now? But we don't have the projection, isn't it? So if someone has a songbook, but will you all be able to follow if we sing it? Try, okay. Anyway, nowadays you have your iPhones and iPads. And, for me it's an I know phone. You may have your. So Sri Rupa Manjari Pada, that's the song. And then he asked one of his disciples, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, to sing this song. Because Rupa Goswami, who's our chief acharya, we are called Rupanugas, follower of Rupa Goswami. He is none other than Rupa Manjari, who is the assistant of Lalita Sakhi, who is the assistant of Srimati Radharani, who is the assistant of Krishna. So that is our mood. So then Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur eventually departed from this world at 5:30 in the morning on the 1st of January 1937. And all the devotees then were of course remembering his glories. They were praying, feeling great separation from him already. But in the passing away, in their passing away, these great devotees, these great acharyas, they teach us the biggest lesson of their lives. They teach us how we should also prepare for that eventual moment that will come to us. As Prabhupada used to tell his disciples, don't think this is not going to happen to you. When he saw himself as skin and bones, when he knew he had very little time left, this is what he told his disciples. Don't think this is not going to happen to you. So prepare for it by being Krishna conscious. So we can get inspiration from these examples, so that we can do our Krishna consciousness with more conviction and more determination. So we will sing now Sri Rupa Manjari Pada. The lotus feet of Sri Rupa Manjari, Rupa Goswami's eternal form as a gopi of Vraja, are my real wealth. They are the object of my devotional service and worship. They are the treasure of my heart, and they are my ornaments in the life of my life. For me, they are the reservoirs of all rasa, and the conclusion of all the religion of the Vedas. They are the fulfillment of all my desires, and the goal of all my vows, my austerities, my religious activities, and the chanting of my mantra. By the power of those lotus feet, my activities will become favorable to devotion. I will achieve spiritual perfection, and with these two eyes, I shall be able to actually see both day and night. The flood of exquisite beauty of Sri Rupa Manjari's divine lotus feet will shine like the brilliant full moon upon the lotus of my heart, soothing my afflicted soul. O Rupa Manjari, the venom of the snake of separation from you has enfeebled my soul, and now my life is ever afflicted and distressed. Alas, please have mercy and give me the shade of your lotus feet. Narottam Das has taken refuge. How many of you have it on your phones? Raise your hand. Okay. Everyone, not everyone, but many. You may share it with your neighbor if your neighbor doesn't have it. Shri Rupa Manjari Pada Shri Mora Sampada 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 Shri भजन पूजन श्री मोरा भजन पूजन श्री मोरा श्री मोरा प्राण धन श्री मोरा आभरण श्री मोरा श्री मोरा प्राण धन श्री मोरा आभरण श्री मोरा श्री मोरा श्री मोरा जीवन जीवन श्री मोरा जीवन श्री मोरा जीवन जीवन श्री मोरा जीवन श्री मोरा रस निधि श्री मोरा वांछा सिद्धि 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 श्री मोरा वेद श्री मोरा श्री मोरा वेद श्री मोरा श्री व्रत श्री तप श्री मोरा मंत्र जप 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 श्री मोरा धर्म श्री मोरा श्री मोरा धर्म अनुकूल भावे विधि সেই পদে হবে সিদ্ধি অনুকূল হবে বিধি সেই পদে হবে সিদ্ধি অনুকূল হবে বিধি সেই পদে হবে সিদ্ধি রাখিব হে দুই না জানে রাখিব হে দুই না জানে রূপ মাধুরী রাশি বন কুবলয় শশী प्राण कुवलय शशि प्रफुल्लित हवे निशि প্রফুল্লিত হবে तुया दर्शन अहि गरले जरल देहि तुया दर्शन अहि तुया दर्शन अहि गरले जरल देहि तुया दर्शन अहि गरले जरल देहि चिरदिन तापि सजीवना चिरदिन तापि चिरदिन तापि प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पद छाया प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पद छाया प्रभु करो दया देह मोरे पद छाया Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, वैष्णवाचार्य वृंद की जय, श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, गौर प्रेमानंदे।